All right. Thank you, Pastor Jimmy, for being willing to sit down with me virtually.
No
And
problem.
yeah, just talk a little bit about what's been going on in your ministry with the since the pandemic. So I guess my first question is, uh, what general changes have you seen in your ministry over the course of has it been like 7, 8 months?
Yeah, I think we started actually the first weekend of March is when we started our lockdown. So we haven't been, so it's been since beginning of March. So what is that? 8 months? No, 10 months. No,
Oh,
9, 10 months? I guess at the end of this month, it'll be 10 months.
and you haven't met in person at all since then?
Uh, we did meet in person at church like 2 different Sabbath afternoons because we decided to do like a long awaited renovation project for the English sanctuary since,
Oh,
we were having some issues getting budget approval and this, not whatever, but all of a sudden the church was like, yeah, go at it. And so
really?
um,
Okay.
we had everybody show up one afternoon just to kind of plan as a group together, like kind of how we wanted to do it, because we gutted it out pretty much down to
Oh,
the studs. Um, and then we met again, I think about a month after that, Sabbath afternoon, we all got together, and then we were all just moving all the stuff out of the youth sanctuary into the choir room in the main church so that the rehabbers could start. But uh, yeah, both of those times, and then we went to dinner afterward. But those are the only 2 times we've met in person.
but you haven't had services.
No, not in person. No.
Right, right, right. Well, I imagine that it's changed, since the beginning of the pandemic, in terms of your ministry and what it looks like now, or if not, I don't know. But I know, when I speak to some other pastors, they were like, in the beginning, it was just very stopgap measures because they thought that it was going to be, we'll go back to normal in a few months.
Mhm.
Um, so for your ministry, you know, has the online services changed in any way over the course of these months?
Well, I mean, I think like for the first 2 weeks when we started our shutdown, that was kind of mimicking, I guess, the lockdown orders that were coming down, from the top, I guess, from
Hmm.
the White House, and then here in Georgia, they started that. And so when we initially started it, like we literally were only trying to comply with kind of the federal mandate and the local Georgia mandate. And so we actually thought at that time maybe we would just be closed for a couple of weeks and then we'll kind of be back. And
Hmm.
so I know that the first 2 weeks, because even us canceling the church thing kind of came like, I don't know if it was an afterthought and the Korean side forgot to let us know about their plans to shut down in person. But like I literally found out about it the Wednesday before, we were supposed to be meeting for church. Um, and so like for the first 2 weeks, what we did is we had people like kind of share any online ministries that they were aware of and that they enjoyed. It's I think I want to say the first Sabbath we joined the Oakwood College service because we have a couple of alumni from there.
Hmm.
Um, and I want to say one of those meetings, I can't remember who the other one was. We joined somebody else's. Oh, Chattanooga first. My best friend Brian's up in Collegedale area, but he goes to Chattanooga first. I never got to see his senior pastor speak, Jerry Arnold, but I guess he's been there for a while. But so we joined them for one Sabbath. But both of them were like kind of like they're just broadcasting, so it's not like it's not like Zoom or anything where you're interacting. It's just more
Hmm.
were watching. So we just kind of watch as a group, and then we can kind of, we were kind of messaging back and forth if anything of interest was coming up while we're talking. And then after the second week, by that point, the Korean side was saying, oh yeah, they're going to be shut down for a while, and they didn't know when. And then so once we kind of got to that place, and then a couple more weeks had gone by, and then we can kind of see what was happening as more and more states, as stuff was going on. That's kind of when we realized, oh, you know what, we're going to be doing this in person. And so then just madly, real quick, trying to talk to people about the best options to do this. Zoom kept coming up, and then a couple of kids that had used it quite a bit for work, so they're familiar with it. So then we started utilizing Zoom, and then we've been doing that every Friday night and every Sabbath morning since then. And at the beginning, I always figured that this was going to be a little awkward, because even for me, for my speaking stuff, it's kind of weird that generally I can speak live, but anything other than live, like I struggle. Like, I don't know what it is, but like I got to have some sort of feedback and whatever. And after the first weekend of doing it, I realized that it was very challenging for me, especially when a lot of my attendees in the early phases, they just kind of like to jump in and pop up their name on the screen, and they're not on camera, right?
Right.
And I didn't say anything for the first, weekend, and even the second weekend, I mentioned it a couple of times, but I didn't really make a big deal about it. But when it feels like you're just speaking to a computer screen, and this is like me trying to record a sermon too. It's just horrendous. So that kind of gave me two different ideas. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the attendees, and I realize that if you're not on a two-way street where they can see you as well, it makes it very easy for you to just kind of, maybe if you have your computer or your iPad, it's kind of up, but you can just kind of walk around and do whatever you need to be doing and just kind of have it droning in the background. So I realized there would be a temptation for the participants not to be as engaged, and then also for me having the difficulty. So then I made it a point to really just ask everybody to be live on camera. And for our Friday and our Saturday services at that point, I decided to kind of cut off the thing that we had been doing up to that point. And I wanted to move it into something that was a little bit more of a small group format, where instead of me just talking, it's more group participation. And so we started off Friday nights with some stuff where we were keeping accountability. It was actually like everybody wanted to do it, but so we started getting into learning about, ways to build habits, like how to effectively build habits. And so we were reading a book on that and discussing it. And everybody that was with us in the initial stages, it's kind of one of those things where a lot of Adventists, most of their lives, they've always been told to have, daily devotions. And I think even for themselves, they know they want to do that. But for the majority of people that I run into, it's very rare that you find someone that is doing that on a consistent basis. And so we kind of mishmash those two together, kind of more of a personal growth and development thing on learning the principles of how to build habits. And then based off of that, then we created, our Friday nights kind of became like an accountability group, where we as a group made like a plan on how we would start, working on our devotional, how to build a devotional habit. And, we laid out the groundwork, and then everybody kind of filled in the details as they wanted. Obviously we started very slow. I think like the first week was just open your Bible for 1 minute and then put it back down. And the next week was like open it up for like 3 minutes. And then the third week was 5 minutes. And then once we got past the third week, then we started focusing in on building the content of what we were doing. Whereas the first 3 weeks, it was just more getting the repetitions of the habit of in the morning, or, some of them were doing it in the evening, of opening up your Bible and just kind of getting into that mode. And so that was very engaging. And so we had a lot of participation. And on Saturdays, what we started doing is, rather than me just preaching, we did a kind of a verse by verse study of Galatians together. And then we got through Galatians. And then right now we're about 10 chapters into Romans. But it was kind of the idea, and I had already told them even before the pandemic last year that, when the new year rolled around, the idea was to kind of start with grace again, but start with Galatians and Romans, because that's always kind of the key books. And even for the 1888 General Conference and whatever, when all that, the voting and all that stuff was going on, that was really based off of those two pastors and their study from Galatians and Romans. And so that's kind of what we have been doing. And I find that if I start getting a little bit too talky, and then all of a sudden I've been actually just preaching almost the majority of the time, I on Zoom, I seem to find less engagement. But the more I kind of step back and I try to act more as kind of a coach and a facilitator in that arena, it seems like our participation is getting a lot better. So that's kind of the fine balance that I'm constantly having to kind of balance out. And one other benefit that comes with the Zoom, I think, is that, we've been at Marietta for a while now, and we've had kind of multiple generations of students that have kind of come, graduated, and then moved on. And, we got one down in Alabama, we got one in DC, we got one in Michigan, we got one, Suhan, Suhan, he's out in California. But the beauty of this is that a lot of our previous, college students that were with us for, 3-4 years, and then they left, since everybody was locked down, we've been having a lot of them joining our service. So that's been nice. As of right now, I got 2 of them that are continuing to kind of stay on, but I think as the churches have been opening, a lot of them they're involved, and so they've been kind of going back. So that's kind of what we've been doing. And, in a sense, we found a nice little groove now. And in some ways it's very helpful. And I think like, especially our Friday nights, I think that we're going to kind of incorporate like a hybrid, even when we go back in person. We're changing everything up. So I think the plan is we're going to have kind of the webcam set up there. And then maybe on Friday nights, what we can do is on the TV with the webcam, allow those that are a little bit further away and there's a lot of traffic, they can kind of join in our meeting that way. And then we have them on the TV screen up front, plus those that can be there, in person that live closer. So we're kind of thinking about experimenting with that once we start. But the lack of being in person, the lack of seeing one another like in person and interacting, doing things together, definitely you can see that that's kind of taken a toll on the group. And so as of right now, we're actively looking to get more kind of extracurricular projects in line. And I'm trying to bring a leadership team together. What I'm basically doing is just trying to find ways to get people more engaged, because the lockdown situation at our church, initially it was second week of November. The Korean side wanted to do a soft opening. We decided with the renovations, we were going to start second weekend of January. But with the things getting worse, and then one of the elders here in the Atlanta area passing away from COVID, everybody at our church got spooked again. And when I spoke to the pastor Friday, he was saying that right now they're thinking maybe springtime 2021 is when they're thinking about coming back. So yeah, I'm just trying to find ways of how we can get more involved. And we did do we didn't get to do our week-long vacation Bible school this year. And then we usually have quarterly events. So we have a back to school event, New Year's event, and then an Easter event, and then the week-long VBS. So we ended up doing a back to school event for the kids, but we did it virtually through Zoom. And it was kind of the first time we were all doing it. So it was pretty chaotic, and we didn't know how it was going to work. And then ahead of time, we had to notify everybody. We had to print out instructions for the people that didn't know what they were doing. And then that Friday before the Saturday, we was about 4 of us that we all kind of distributed all the crafts and the back to school supplies and whatever. And then on Friday afternoon, we were driving around and dropping all that stuff off, so the kids had all their materials. And then we ran it from like I want to say it was like 3 PM to like 6, I think is what we did. And surprisingly, for a first time doing that event on Zoom, it went a lot better than what we were expecting. And so now we're thinking about doing another one now for the new year, because obviously we're not back in person yet. So Yeah, I think from my end, it's just, again, for me, it's difficult for me unless I can see everybody. And then for everybody else, I think it helps them if you force them to be on camera. It helps.
Mhm.
Even now, I mean, like if I don't keep reminding them, like this yesterday, like 75% of them were off camera, right? And so, I didn't scold them or anything, but I'm probably going to get ready to remind everybody to get back on. But that and I think really doing more of a small group type thing where everybody can again be engaged, and even
Mm.
if that's just everybody's going around and reading like a paragraph out of the Bible together, and after reading each paragraph, just stopping and asking them, what are they getting from that? Is there any questions that pop up, or is there anything there that kind of resonates with you? And then, kind of discuss that. And then I wait to the end to put in my 2 cents once they've been able to process that and kind of go through passage by passage. That seemed to be the most effective. And so
Mm.
so even as we get through Romans, when we finish Romans, if we're still not back in person, the plan is to continue kind of a deep dive line by line study on Sabbath. But that's pretty much in a nutshell everything that we've been doing, really.
Okay, sounds great. And it sounds like you really have learned and fine-tuned what has been working for you personally and for your church. Um, it's interesting because your congregation is almost all young adults, right?
Yeah, they are now. Yeah, Sven just turned 22. Yeah, I think all of them are in their 20s now, and then I got a handful in their 30s.
Because because that demographic, according to Pastor David Kim from New Hope Church, because I had an interview with him, he said that was his most difficult demographic to engage. So just I find that interesting that you found a way, but for him, um, you know, they just were not into the Zoom um, or internet kind of worship services. Why do you think that is? Do you have any idea?
So what are they doing in lieu of that? If they're saying they didn't want to do that, is there an alternative that they're doing, or?
No, they're just not coming in. Like, he has the families coming in with their children and things like that, but they're just not um, they're just not participating.
But during in-person services, these people were coming on a regular basis, but once they took
Yes,
over.
I'm assuming that that's the case.
um well, I mean, there, without knowing the specifics of, his situation, I mean, if I were to just generalize a little bit, I mean, I would say that with that particular age group, a lot of them, especially if they grew up in the church, they're already kind of, because we've always had this issue with, once kids get to college and beyond, then they start to fall out of church, right? So if
Hmm.
they go to public college, pretty much they're done. If they go to an Adventist college, well, as long as they're at the Adventist college, they're okay. But then once they leave the Adventist college, then they're done, right?
Hmm.
And so, I think if we think back to kind of maybe even our own experience growing up in the church, and I think this newer generation, like, if we talk about the millennial generation on down, obviously the church environment that they grew up in is a lot different than what we grew up in. Uh,
Hmm.
but still, I mean, because the environment that we grew up in was very legalistic, very hardcore,
Hmm.
very, but then culture as in general is a lot more conservative back then.
Hmm.
Um, but even with the newer generation, you keep hearing all these kids that, once they get off to college and so then they start to fall off the bandwagon. So if you're thinking about it from that standpoint, like historically, if we look at what's been going on in our church, and not just our church, like Christianity as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
well, if the trend has continued to be that once they get to college and beyond, they start to fall out, that means when you're talking about young adults in their 20s, you're talking about people that, if they're going to leave the church, all the scars, all the issues, all the challenges, whatever issues or whatever problems that they have with the church per se,
Mm-hmm.
that means all of that stuff has been happening through their childhood and through their teenage years. And so
Mm-hmm.
by the time they're at undergrad, college age, or in their 20s, well, they're already they already got one foot out the door, right? If you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at it just in a general sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, if you're going to an online situation, well, a lot of that group, I think when they come to church on a weekly basis, part of it is because it's habitual, because their parents, have been making them come to church their entire lives. But I think the bigger thing is that when they come to church, they have kind of a church social life with their
Mm.
friends and
Right.
stuff there. So I think, a lot of the motivation for that particular age group to come to church is so that they can see their friends, hang out, and then maybe go out in the evenings together. And so you're missing that component.
Right.
So you're taking the social component out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're also and then you're also talking about a group of people that may not be that diligent, or may, kind of, whether they know it or not, is on their way out of the church to begin with. So when you take the big social environment out of it, then what other motivation do they have to come in? Because they probably weren't coming to church for the messages or the Sabbath blessing to begin with anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of one thought. And the other thing too is that since everybody's gone online, the younger generation, millennials on down, they're more technologically savvy. They're more ingrained in social media. They know what's going on all around the world, especially here in the country. And so, they may also be, if they're not just kind of utilizing this as an opportunity to just sleep in and not worry about church for a
Uh-huh.
while, if it's not that, the other aspect of it could be too that they are virtually joining their friends around the country, or maybe,
Yeah.
other places, and they may be joining services. So even like for us, some of the kids that were joining in with us, they were joining in with us when their local services weren't available.
That's true.
But once things started opening up, and I'm very proud of this, that a lot of the kids that come through our church and they end up going somewhere else, they're very involved at the churches that they go to. And
Mm-hmm.
so even when those other churches sometimes aren't even doing in person, like Chris up in DC, like as the churches are going virtual, they're already reaching out to him and asking him for help on Sabbath and this and that, whatever. So there's been some of that. But yeah, specifically for David's question, I would say it's just kind of a natural, it would make sense to me that would happen, because you're taking away the primary social element of why they continue to come to church.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe some that are either more diligent, or just because they have friends that are, attached, or joining services. So, like Faya's been doing stuff and
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So, they may be finding other places where
Mm-hmm.
there's more of their peers, and so they can kind of feel a better social kind of engagement. So it could be some of that too.
Right. Right.
That would be my more hopeful, assessment of what's happening. But probably the reality of it is you take away the social aspect of church for a lot of these kids
Mm-hmm.
at that age group, which we know they're kind of on their way out to begin with, then that would make sense that, their motivation to want to participate in that is very low.
Mm. Right. Um, yeah, I think that's a good assessment. What do you see at the end of COVID? For your ministry, like, do you feel like, once churches open, it'll just be, just the same as before COVID? Or do you feel like there will be some fundamental changes to how you do ministry, or will will it not make a difference?
I mean, I don't know that we have enough information to kind of clearly, make an assessment of what it may look like down the road. But I think the one thing that we can be sure of is that nothing will look the same going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and just like life in the United States too, right? I mean, in your life and in my life, have we ever seen, in the land of the free, right? This is the United States. This is where everybody wants to come because this is where opportunities, this is where our parents, risked everything that comes so they can raise their kids here in this country. But when have we ever seen from a federal level or even on a state mandated level where they're forcing people to shut down places of worship, forcing people to shut down places of business, forcing, like, and I understand COVID and I understand this and that, whatever, but, like, there's always risk in life. There's always things that kind of go out and about. And, one of the things about living in a free country is that, there always are going to be risks.
Mm-hmm.
But as an individual, you have to assess those risks and then you behave accordingly and then you deal with the fallout of that stuff. But to see kind of, this push from a state level and a government level of trying to mandate things and this and that, whatever. And I understand the intention of it is for safety and so on and so forth. But the very fact that, we've given the government that kind of overreach and power,
Yeah.
it's very unlikely that when this crisis is passed, that the government says, oh, thank you for that emergency measure. Now we're never going to do that again. I think we've kind of
Right.
set precedents on this. So just even on a life in America or a life in the world scenario, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I think the landscape has been permanently altered. Even in the business world, things are getting flipped upside down. And yes, it's horrendous that all these businesses are going under and people are struggling. But in the midst of all of this, we're also seeing new businesses rising. And so I think this is kind of like this, there's a massive shift going on. And I think within society, within church, the way that
Mm-hmm.
we do business, the way that we do church, all of it, I think, is going to be drastically different going forward. And we may have a few years of an adjustment period once we get past COVID to figure out how everything's going to kind of fall into place. But yeah, I have been thinking about this. I don't know exactly quite like how to anticipate or plan, what we can do going forward. I think there's still a lot of unknown, but definitely we've already been talking, especially after the Vacation Bible School and stuff, because sometimes we have, we've been trying to grow the ministry with the Vacation Bible School kids because some of them are getting older and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, a lot of those churches, kids, either they don't go to church or because a lot of them, I guess Catholicism is pretty big in the Hispanic community. A lot of them are Catholics. And so, there are, at least a good number of them still go to church on Sundays and whatnot. So to try to pull them away and bring them to church on Saturday, and then they go back to church with their parents on Sunday, so on and so forth. We've had a little bit of challenge on that, but we're realizing that utilizing Zoom and things of this nature, it gives us an avenue to maybe even during the week or something along that line, if we
Mm-hmm.
can create some sort of a program or some sort of a ministry or something that these kids get excited about participating in, then we're realizing that utilizing Zoom, we can meet with these kids a lot more often than once a quarter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And originally, I think even before COVID, maybe the problem was a lot of these families, because of the financial situations, either they don't have internet or it's a very slow internet at home. So an option like this wouldn't have even been available. But because of COVID and all the kids being forced to go online, it's like a lot of the households have kind of set it up so that they can do the video stuff now. And so that's another area that we're kind of looking into and whatnot. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure what it's going to look like, but I'm almost 100% positive it's never going to look the same again, and that we're going to go through this massive transition period where everybody's trying to figure things out. And then I'm hoping maybe in about 5 years, as we look back on all this,
Mm-hmm.
we'll have settled into a new norm.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's going to be normal for a while, and we're going to be in transition. And I don't think even when we get back to in person, it's ever going to be the same.
Mm-hmm. No. In terms of, I mean, and it's hard to, generalize, but have you seen a different type of spiritual need or curiosity or, you know, different, tenor of Christian walk during this pandemic among your, church members, or if you want to generalize to the society? I mean, obviously, people realize this is, it's very stress-inducing, and how is that, you know, affecting or their faith? Does it make them more spiritually minded, or the opposite? What do you is there? I mean, I know it's you can't really generalize, but do you see any like trends?
Well, I mean, okay, so if I were just kind of assess our group here, you know, if anything, it just continues to affirm in my mind some kind of ideas that I've held. Like I'm just getting confirmation of it. But like for instance, I think the general human condition is that whenever something is new, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever something is new and unfamiliar, there's a certain level of excitement that comes with it, and therefore you will generally see a higher level of participation whenever something is new, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of the human condition. And so I think that's why like even if you look at the Korean, the way that the Korean side does their ministry, they're always trying to outdo what they did last time. Like it's always trying to outdo and whatnot, because they've kind of built a habit of utilizing external things to trying to pump up the quality of the worship or the participation or so on and so forth. But it's kind of one of those things where they always say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's taken me 20 plus years to really settle down into this thing. But in my early 30s, just gung ho with ministry. You just want everybody to see Jesus and love Jesus the way that you do, and you're
Mm-hmm.
frustrated when they don't see it. And it's just kind of, it's kind of like that prince trying to put the glass slipper on, the Cinderella's stepsister's feet, and they're just trying to cram it in there. It's got it, whatever. That's kind of what it felt like trying to get that across to kids. And not understanding why they're not getting more engaged or why this isn't interesting them, and so on and so forth. But over the years, what you end up finding is that you have to continue to do your job, continue to lay your seeds, and rely upon the Holy Spirit to do what the Holy Spirit's going to do. And whether somebody else gets to see the harvest of that, or maybe I'm just laying the seeds, somebody else got to water it, and then somebody else down the road will kind of be there and witness kind of maybe the harvest coming up or whatnot. But and I've done this in youth ministry too, right? You're always trying to stimulate the senses by changing things up, bringing something new in, and from a short-term basis, it does provide a false sense of success, because you see an increase sometimes in attendance, you see an increase in engagement, but it's only when it's new. And the moment the newness starts to wear off, the old patterns come back, right? And so it's like, for those that are very, like, you can tell, even at church on a weekly basis, you can kind of tell who's kind of on this journey. They're hungry and they're searching and they're studying, and you can kind of see who's on that journey. You can see those that are just kind of there because it's just kind of, that's their life, and it's more cultural, and they're there because their friends they're there. And then you see the handful of individuals that have been on the path for a while, and they're just kind of self-sufficient. They kind of continue to do their own thing. And so it's like the same thing that I'm finding with this, is that initially, when it was all new, I mean, we had everybody joining in. And then within a couple of weeks, when we reached out to all of our the people that used to come but moved away, and then they started joining in, like, it was really great for about a month. But then as time starts to go on, then eventually the level. So we had like I never had a Friday night participation in all the years that I've been at you know, Atlanta church, because usually Friday night Vespers, if we have a huge group, it's 6 or 7 people. On average, it's like, you know, 3, 4, and granted, you know, service, you know, even if we're starting it at 7:30, some of them have like a 45-minute drive without traffic, and then you got Friday, you know, traffic to deal with and whatever. So Friday was just more, it was just kind of a more free flow area that we can do that. But it was nice when we first started because we had everybody on our calls.
Mhm.
But then as time goes on, what happens? Like no matter what you're doing, the numbers start to thin.
Mhm.
And now on our Friday nights, we're right back to what we were at before, the
Mhm.
same number of people. Now, granted, there are a couple of sleepers, people that I would say that when they were in person,
Mhm.
not sleepers as in sleeping, although, you know, we have, you know, some of those too, but like sleepers, meaning when they're in person, they don't really talk. They're very they're introverted.
Mhm.
Um, you can't tell if they're enjoying their time here or not, but obviously they're getting something because they've been coming here for 4 years straight. But you know, you can't really get a sense because they're more, you know, introverted and they don't do a whole lot. But I
Mhm.
have found at least 2 or 3 of our members, once we go online, for some oddball reason, now they're opening up. They're more engaged. They're
Mm.
talking more. They're like, so I don't know if it's something about somebody being introverted. It's a safer space when they're doing it
Mhm.
through the computer. But that was one interesting thing that kind of came up that I didn't expect. And that is some of the more quieter, introspective, not the ones that like to talk a lot, that they actually opened up and they're engaged a lot more
Mhm.
now. And then, you know, our Saturday groups are still, they're not as large as before because a lot of the ones, you know, that had left that were joining us for a while now, you know, I think they're back in their local ministries. But the funny thing of it is, you know, in the early days, everybody was getting there on time. But sure enough, you know, nobody's driving anymore, right? All you got to do is go, you know, hit a button and you're on the computer or whatever. But the same people that always come to church late, they come to church late. It doesn't matter if you're coming virtually. It doesn't matter if you're driving. It doesn't matter if it takes you 45 minutes to get to church or it takes you, you know, 60 seconds to get on Zoom. It's just another one of those things that, you know, you can't change people because people, if they want to change, they got to change themselves. And
Right,
so,
right.
you know, so it's just kind of interesting that you give them enough time and all the old patterns come up. And so, you know, if anybody ever says, oh, my drive is too far, or oh, you know, I have this problem going on or whatever, you know, I didn't point this out yet. But if they ever try to use that excuse going forward, a follow-up question is, so what happened with all your Zoom when we were on Zoom? Because a lot of them they're still late about the same amount of time they were when they were, you know, some of them coming in 30 minutes, right? They generally walk in 10 minutes into the sermon on the dot, right? Like every week, and they're doing the same thing now. So it's just kind of interesting that, you know, once you get past the newness of things, everybody kind of still goes back to where they're at. And anybody that tries to tell you that they sleep in church because they were just super tired the night before, or that they're late because this happened, that happened, you know, yeah, one off, understandable. But we all know the people that sleep in church and the people that come late, it's not a one-off thing. It's like a weekly thing. And so it's just more of a mindset and kind of the way that they, you know, and you can't change that really. I mean, you can bring it to their attention, but they have to realize that that's an issue and they got a desire to want to change that. And then they got to work to change that. And, you know, that's not as easy to do because, you know, you have a firmly established habit, and trying to go against that grain takes a lot of intention and effort as well. And that's the other challenge with the younger generation this day and age. They
Mhm.
don't know what it means to put in concerted effort for a long period. Well, to them, putting in you know, effort for a long period of time to them might be a week or 2 weeks. You know, for me, putting in concerted effort for a long period of time, you know, entry level, we're talking 2-3 years, right? To
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
start to get something going. But that's the other thing that I realized too, is it's just the younger generation. Again, I think it has to do with the culture. They have very thin skin, and they don't really have tolerance to kind of see something for any length of period of time if they're not getting something from it right away,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
unfortunately, some of the best things in life that we can develop in our person, in our characters, or habits that we can develop. Some of the best things in life in general. We're not even just talking from a Christian standpoint, just holistically as humans. Some of the best things require that kind of work and persistence at something for a long period of time, then to allow eventually the fruits and harvests to start coming in. And I see that's kind of one of the challenges with the younger generation, is there's just, this is the instant gratification, right? Like, you need to contact somebody, push a button, you're talking to them within a few seconds. You're hungry for something, you go to McDonald's, and if you got to sit in the drive-thru for more than 3-4 minutes, you're getting angry. Like, so it's like this generation, like their world is so based around things being handed to them, being coddled, everybody getting a trophy and a certificate, and and so on and so forth, and nobody is really allowed to struggle with anything, right? I mean, when we're kids, we're all out there playing, getting hurt, scratched up, whatever. You see kids these days, they parents got like elbow pads, wrist guards, helmet, goggles, knee pads, boots, and then they're sending them out there, and it's like, look, they can get hit by a semi truck, they're not going to get hurt. You got them so wrapped up. But I think we are now starting to reap the harvest of that in the newer generation coming up, because the challenges, and I actually, during all of this, I started an accountability group. I had 3 girls that all were very interested in, making a concerted effort to, go down a path of personal growth and development. They all have aspirations, they have goals, they have things that they want to do. And so I've been working with them, and that's another kind of good thing that's spawned out of it, is an opportunity to do that. And I meet with them once a week, and then once a month I have a one-on-one meeting with them. And I'm realizing it with them. To me, their mindset is the cream of the crop with this newer generation, because they're open to criticism. They're open to feedback. They understand that in order for things to change, they got to change it, and they can't just hope that the world around them hands it to them. So their mindsets are in the right place. And yet, when I'm talking to them and I say, yeah, it'll probably take you about 3-4 years before you say, and then like, what, 3-4 years? They just balking at these numbers, because they're not used to the idea of having to work on something very long. Because, and again, I think all 3 of these kids, they like, one of them, she got a free ride to Emory all the way through, top of her class in high school. So it's like, they did very well in school, but apparently, they, again, just the culture they grew up in, maybe a year is absolutely the longest they can consider doing anything, it seems. But that's another challenge. And especially if we're dealing with the younger, generations, especially in ministry, that's something we got to kind of keep into account. Because if we're not careful, because I found myself doing this, and then, now I've been working on, trying to find little things to kind of cue myself when I'm doing it, and to correct that as quickly as I can. But if we're not careful, because the world that we grew up in, and what we know, and I'm not saying we know absolute truth, but we know a lot about life and what life is like compared to them, because, obviously, we've been around a lot longer. And, I'm not going to say that we had it harder growing up. I think we just had, in my opinion, we had a normal upbringing. That's how we did, Kids were out playing. Now, granted, the world seems to be a lot scarier than back then, but, it wasn't uncommon for kids to come home with no parents there. We had latchkey kids, people call them latchkey kids.
Sure.
It's not uncommon. You come home and, you do, play your piano, do your homework, and then you're outside till it's dark, running around the neighborhood playing with your kids. You fall, and that's okay, right? You get in trouble in elementary school, you get sent to the principal's office and they paddle you, right? You get punished, things of that nature. And that was all just kind of normal. And so there's this challenge that I'm realizing, because of our perspective, it's very difficult for us to wrap our minds around the perspective of the younger generation coming up. And therefore it's almost, it gets too easy to be very dismissive of it and just be like, get out of here. You really think that's like,
Right.
and then not only do you become judgmental and condescending, but then the energy that you are, sharing with that person is no longer good, and they're not feeling good about it.
Mhm.
Because as far as they're concerned, that's their reality, and they don't know what, and so I'm realizing that it's such a large gap. It just happened. Like there wasn't a transition. It just like literally went from this type of an upbringing to this overnight. And we have an entire generation of kids that have grown up, and now they're all in their 20s, and getting, and some of them, I guess the millennials go up and right up to the early 30s, but they're all basically out in the workforce, and they're struggling, and a lot of them are out there protesting because they got no job, and they've been told from the time that they're younger, you're the first generation that's gonna have it worse off than your parents' generation. It's never happened in the history of the United States. They've been told all this stuff. And I realize that the world that they see is vastly different than the world that we see. And, so from a ministry standpoint, we have to be a little bit sensitive to that, and maybe try to put in some extra effort to try to understand, the worldview that they have, because without any kind of empathy, you're not going to have, a whole lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Influence or whatnot around them. And I realized that even like, with kids that are growing up in the Adventist church, they're not quite as bad as, generally speaking, the rest of their peers out in the world, if you will. And that's because, they grew up in the Adventist church. So they're still like from a community or a cultural standpoint, they still got a lot of, hard, kind of hardships. They had a lot of, legalism. They had a lot of, so they had a lot of that kind of stuff that's in common with us, like the way that we kind of grew up in the church. But society as a whole raised them up differently. And, and their parents, though, probably tried to raise them up, as our parents tried to raise us up. But because of their peers and, the school and society and all their time, being spent on social media, the world for them has changed. And this is the thing that really scares me is, wow, I'm having this much of a challenge trying to understand and empathize with these millennials that grew up in the church. So in many ways, there's still a lot of kind of commonalities and places that we can go. And so there's a lot of like bridges that I can utilize to try to help them see a different perspective and whatnot. But I can't even begin to imagine what it would be like for somebody that didn't grow up in the church, that didn't grow up as an Adventist, that not only did they get that from social media and society and school and peers, but they're getting that from their parents growing up as well.
Right.
So I have a hard enough time as it is trying to understand and empathize with the millennial's point of view for a millennial who grew up in the Adventist church. And I think this might be why, like, sometimes I see some of the things that are going on in the world, what's going on in social media, and like I'm just like completely like have no idea how you get there from here, like type of thing. So that's definitely a challenge coming up. And if there's anybody, and I know Adventists generally we're not so seeker friendly in our services. We usually like to just minister to the choir, but there are a lot of ministries out there, whether it's Adventist or non-Adventist, that are very seeker friendly, or their mission statement really is to go and find the unchurched, right, the non-Christians, and bring them in. And so in any kind of ministry, especially if you're trying to minister to younger kids, and I think even as a church in general, we've been, for generations now, we've been struggling with, the answer to how can we, retain our young people in our churches and whatnot. And I think this throws an extra element. We were already failing miserably at that, at trying to figure out the answer to that as a corporate body. We were already failing miserably at that. But now you throw on top of that this new kind of paradigm of how society and what the worldview is. You throw that on top of that. And I think, like, more than anything else, it gets even more impossible to reach out to that group, because it's not even the message anymore. It's me and them. Like, you see the vitriol from the politics that's been going on, right? It's like people act like, it's like literally, it's not like we're talking about a small fraction, like crazy extreme group somewhere, whether it's on the left or right. We're literally talking about half the country, I mean, you can say Biden had 7 million more popular votes than whatever. But if you look at the numbers, in essence, half the people voted for one party, half voted for the other party. So you
Right.
can't sit here and say the other half is crazy and they've lost their mind. Like you have to lose your mind to think that that half of the population just lost their mind in the United States. But you can see kind of how they treat one another, and you see families and friendships fracturing only because they found out that somebody voted for somebody, or only because they reposted something that's kind of wait, like, and that's the kind of attitude that's kind of coming, and so if we, especially if we aren't trying to figure like a way to kind of get in touch with that mindset and get better at being able to reach out to people like our church, we're dead meat, because we've had enough trouble as it is right now, and then on top of that you throw in this completely different mindset and on how they view the world and whatnot, and there's going to be no respect for what their parents think, there's no respect for what their pastors think, because they're all boomers, right? Hashtag boomer. So that's a big challenge I see kind of coming forward. And it's kind of scary if I think about that, because even with those that grew up in the church, I have a hard time empathizing with them. But I have points of common. And so generally we can at least, if we can't come to an agreement on this higher, on this ultimate thing, we can at least come down far enough down to a certain point where we find common ground somewhere because of the similarities in the way that we were brought up, even though even that's a little bit different. But to try to find common ground and connect with somebody that doesn't even have that, yeah, it's I've been actually thinking about that for quite a bit, and I haven't had any kind of breakthroughs on how do you reach out to somebody like that. And I know what we see in the news and what we see, social media and whatever, like hopefully that's not indicative of what, the majority of the people are doing, but you see a lot of these conflicts with people trying to have a conversation or, try to talk with one another. And you can just see it. It's just like, they're not talking with one another. They're just talking at each other.
Yes.
And they're just basically, they don't care what you have to say. They're just basically saying, you're wrong, I'm right. This is the right path. The other side, even, and I've seen some people, the other people will push back, and then sometimes it'll escalate into, and it gets kind of bad. People with like fish flying, and God forbid, sometimes, guns come out and whatever. But then I've seen some scenarios, and I've seen it happen on both sides. It's not just one side doing it or whatever. But I have seen, people coming up with a genuine sense of, I want to talk with you and find out, what you guys are protesting and why, and trying to have these conversations. And they're not out there to have conversation, have people understand. It's almost like the culture is, you're either on our side or you're not. And if you're not on our side, then you're all part of the same pool and you're all the enemy type of thing.
Right.
And that I can foresee that is going to pose a huge challenge to ministry all across the board as we continue to move forward, unless the generation coming behind the millennials have a reawakening and they move away from that. But if what the millennials started is kind of the path that we keep going down, yeah, we're going to have a lot of challenges going down the road. Because when you see young people just disavowing their parents, and you even know, and some of these kids, and it wasn't like this bad relationship where kids just don't, like, it, and the parents are fairly, intelligent. So they're not, sometimes Korean parents, they can, with their kids, they can, chuchak buryo quite a bit, right? Like, but yeah, you see some that are very reasonable, so on and so forth, and yet their mindsets are at a point where they kind of fall into this group think that they're not open to anybody that they should be open to for influence. And to kind of see this reaction to me, which doesn't make any sense, but to see so much of these kind of reactions happening, that's going to make it very challenging, because how do you reach out to them, right? You got to be able to find some sort of common ground,
Right.
Because then, because if you don't have, because if you're already starting from two different worldviews, you got to be able to come to some sort of common ground somewhere as a starting point to start something. And yet the challenge is that I think it's going to get harder and harder to do that. So I don't know. This is kind of the thing that I've been kind of thinking about, praying about, journaling about, because it's challenging enough as it is dealing with millennials that grew up Adventists. I don't even know how it's possible to go to a non-Adventist or somebody who didn't grow up Christian and how to find any kind of common ground with them on anything. Because it almost seems like if you start going down the list of all kind of, well, the majority of them, they don't even know what they believe. It's just, they're just kind of along for the ride. But if you actually go to the organizations and look at all the things that they stand for and what they're pushing for, it's just like, there's no common ground in any of these. Like, how do I find common ground in all this, right? It's like, when you got one group that, and again, this isn't everybody. A lot of people are just kind of going along with the wave of what's happening. But like the intentions of people doing stuff, it's going to be a much smaller group of individuals out there. But like what's like we're dealing with this upsurge of people that want to basically eliminate the police. Like this country is like, if you don't have law and order in your country, we're in trouble. Like either the entire country falls into chaos, or we turn into a communist country where the government takes control over everything, and then the government sends out military to squash and this, not whatever. But I don't know. You start looking at all the things, and it's just like, how do you find common ground with somebody who wants to eliminate the police? How do you find common ground with somebody that believes, because if you look at my Facebook feed, I try to stay as neutral as possible when it comes to politics. And I think personally, every pastor out there or anybody involved in ministry ought to be doing that as well. Now they can carry their own personal beliefs, but you got to try to keep as a objectively neutral position as possible. Otherwise you alienate people. And even with kind of the way that these lines have been drawn during this last election cycle, even then, not everybody neatly fits in one box or the other, right?
Sure.
So you got a lot of people that might lean more blue, and yet in certain arenas, they're very red in some of their stuff. And again, if you look at the general, always historically, the younger people are, the more left-leaning that they are. And then once they graduate, start a family and start working in the workforce, then they start leaning more and more to the right, right? That's just kind of the traditions of stuff. But if you're looking at things now, it's challenging when you see people that have grown up in the church, and some people that you look at and you're like, I think that they're pretty, as best as they can, they're as faithful as they can in their Christian walk. And we obviously have these Christian principles that are not just unique to Adventism, right? Don't hate people. Don't return, evil for evil. Like try to do the right thing. Make a contribution to the world. Like there's these general Christian principles that that I would think that any Christian that's sincere about their beliefs is going to hold true. And yet, in this political cycle, it's almost like those Christian values. It's just, okay, let's just bury it in the backyard because all bets are off. And so when I see how much cultural influence is impacting people, that's also a very scary thing, right? Because again, if you can't even, if you can't go to another Christian and try to find some common ground to have a discussion about what is kind of, on the table at this moment, by coming from Christian, like basic Christian principles that we should all be able to agree on. Right. If that doesn't even work, then we are literally the ship without a rudder. You're just out in the ocean and being tossed to and fro. And I would like to think that hopefully with some time as we look back, that it's not as bad as it's going to be. But like my outlook for the immediate future, plus we're Adventists and we've been told our entire lives, Jesus is coming soon, Jesus is coming soon. We've been, and again, we've heard it all our whole time, but there's also a part of us, at least the older, our generation and older, there's always a part of us that whenever something happens out in the news, there's always a part of the radar that goes off because it's like, because we've been, and so with that idea in the back of our mind too, it's and kind of with some of the stuff that we've been told is like, if it's going to happen that way, you can kind of, because I was even thinking about this last night. You think about this, this is personally between you and me. I'm not somebody that says that everything that we've been saying that's going to happen at the end is going to happen exactly at the end as we've been saying. I think it was relevant, and I think it was important back when the church first started, but we are contextually in a completely different place. The entire early church was based on Jesus is literally coming this year. Okay, he didn't come this year, then it's going to be next year. Oh, he didn't come, it's going to be like, that was the entire thing. And it took Ellen White somewhere in the 1890s, in the last, like, you know, decade to 2 decades of her life, that's when she finally started coming to the realization, oh, maybe Christ isn't coming in my lifetime. And all the other people around her that was part of that movement in the beginning died off. And so then what did Ellen White do at the end of her ministry? She really just buckled down and made writing her priority, brought in a lot of ghostwriters to kind of oversee, but she was trying to get as much of her writing out as possible because she started to realize she's probably going to be dead before Christ comes. She wants to make sure that, you know, kind of like Moses did with the Israelites before he died. He wanted to make sure that everybody had all the instructions that they needed. So, you know, but if we're going to ever have like a Sunday law, right, where you know, the United States says we all need to go back to God. You know, we're experiencing this turmoil because of God. You know, we have God's displeasure, and we are founded on a Christian nation. We need to go back, and then you get some sort of crazy Sunday law thing coming down, this, not, whatever. Well, I mean, I'm already thinking about this. If this secularism in the United States, and it's not just the United States, it's happening all around in the Western countries right now. If this thing continues to get out of hand, and there is no anchor for this secular thing that is rising, even they don't have common ground. Because if you're on the other side, they will destroy you for something. But if you're on their side, they'll say, oh, apology accepted, and they'll move on. So, and they say one thing, and then they go out and contradict themselves. I mean, you look at Governor Newsom in California, shuts down the lockdown that even the left and the right are all protesting and upset about. And then shortly thereafter, he gets busted eating at a restaurant indoors with all these people around, not masked and whatever. And then he's got to come out and eat crow and try to apologize and whatever. But it's like, there's no common ground in that area. But what I'm thinking is, if that thing starts to get a hold and our country really starts to go down the toilet, and we know that there's, you know, a lot of conservatives still out there, like conservatives meaning Christians, there may eventually, if things get crazy enough, there may be a pushback to do it that way. And then all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I can see a pathway to how a Sunday law could come about. But let's not even talk about the Sunday law. You know, we've been told, you know, oh, there's going to come a time where, you know, if you don't bow down and take the mark of the beast, whatever that means, you know, we like to say it's, you know, the day you worship. It's not that simple. But, you know, oh, if you don't receive the mark of the beast, you know, you won't be able to get a job. You won't be able to buy. You won't be able to sell. You're going to have to run for your life, and so on and so forth. You know, and this is why we had, you know, some of our parents' generations going out into the wilderness and living together in a commune and things of that nature. But I don't know. Right now, as we speak, this cancel culture thing is starting to get out of hand. And it's almost like the mark of the beast is, you know, are you agreeing with all the virtue signal going on? You know, will you come out and say that Biden, it's President-elect Biden? I don't want to hear that he's not technically, that the electors haven't voted. I don't want to hear any of that. You need to say what we're saying. And, you know, or you know, like, who is it? Jimmy Fallon. There was another girl, Miley Cyrus's sister. They've said some horrendous like things in the past, where these days people have been canceled for far less. But Fallon and Miley Cyrus's sister, they get a pass because they're part of that group. And then you get other people say things that are not nearly as controversial, but then social media goes crazy against them. So then these poor individuals come out, and then they have to express an apology for what they said. But the apology means nothing. All it does is makes them attack them more, right? So it's like, you know, we've been told, you know, growing up in this country, it's like, you know, I could ever imagine a time where, you know, I mean, you know, we were always told about, you know, in the 80s, we're talking about, you know, these little chips that we would get implanted in us, and that's how they would, you know, we do all our money, this, that, which a lot of that technology is actually here. But it's interesting to see what we've been told all our entire lives is that if you don't, you know, if you don't take the mark of the beast, that your ability to buy and sell and work is going to be taken away. And I'm not saying that this is the fruition of that, because there are a lot of other things that's supposed to happen before you get to that point. But it's kind of funny, if you look at the way cancel culture has been acting this year, it's almost like you could take those same kind of ideas of what will happen and it fits the narrative, right? So let's call BLM. So you have to profess BLM. Black Lives Matter, whoever in that organization came up with that slogan is a genius. They should have gotten paid millions of dollars, because who in their right mind, if they don't know anything about the organization and what they stand for, who in their right mind is going to say, I don't agree with Black Lives Matter? It's like, what? Like, that's just common sense. Of course, Black Lives Matter. It's such a catchy slogan that a lot of people are just kind of, hook, line, and sinker involved in it without necessarily knowing what they're being involved with. But the idea of it, like, do we want our Black brothers and sisters out there to be receiving, prejudice and bias, and that the law treats them unfairly, or so on and so forth, or that, do we really have systemic racism in this country? I mean, I'm hard pressed to, because nobody's ever actually come out and given any evidence of it. All they're doing is making proclamations of it, right? We have systemic racism, and we had a Black president for 8 years. It's like, we have, I don't know, but the point being is, but that's not to say, I know that, they're trying to say systemically it's a problem, but the reason why they're saying systemically it's a problem, because if systemically there's a problem, the only way to fix a systemic problem is to tear down the entire system and rebuild it from scratch, right? But you have this kind of scenario where, like even here in Georgia, in the midst of that George Floyd stuff, you had all these people madly sticking out signs in front of their businesses, Black Lives Matter. Why are they putting those signs out there? Because they don't want people to come and riot them. But when you watch what was happening, it didn't matter. You saw in some of these cities, people, Black Lives Matter stuff. You had some, business owners going out, providing water and stuff to the protesters and whatnot. But when the looting and the rioting started, they weren't let go. They got hit with that as well. But, so we saw this initial thing. And even on social media, you had employees throwing their boss under the bus and going on social media and saying, the boss at the place that I work, he's not making a statement supporting Black Lives Matter. We need to veto this guy and whatever. And I've seen businesses go down because the young ones in there, they don't it's like, by doing nothing. It's not even that they said, oh, I don't agree with Black Lives Matter. It's not even that. They did nothing. And the very fact that they're not putting hashtag BLM on the company, a Twitter page, or because they didn't make a statement, or they didn't put a statement out on their website, that these young ones are coming back and basically trying to hijack the ship. And so there's people out there today that lost their livelihood. They're having a hard time finding a job, and they've kind of gotten blacklisted. And it's kind of interesting that this whole concept of what's going to happen with the market of the beast down the road, I couldn't even imagine how that could happen in the United States. Granted, that was before technology and social media took off, but it's kind of interesting and scary at the same time to see that actual thing is happening now as we speak. And so, there's all this, there's this kind of pragmatic side of me that goes, if we're really close to the second coming of Christ, and we know things continue to spiral out of control, and the whole reason that God comes when he comes is that things are so out of hand that pretty much everybody has kind of chosen a side, and you don't even have to say that I'm a Christian. It's just you choose a side of righteousness or you don't. And if that's where we're coming, and we believe that Christ is coming, and if we think that is Christ going to come in my lifetime, I think there's a good chance of that. But that means things are going to get a lot worse, a lot worse. And so then there's this kind of pragmatic side. It's like, what's the use, type of thing. But at the same token, that also should kind of be a shot across the bow to maybe we got to get a little bit more engaged. We got to put, we got to get more energy. We got to really think more. We got to talk more. We got to discuss more. We got to try different things. Because it's kind of like, if this is kind of like the last hour before the world comes to an end, if you will,
Hmm.
then we need to go out there and try to maximize as much as we can while there is still some light before the light vanishes.
Right.
And so it's kind of, you want to be optimistic that things aren't as bad as they're going to be, but because it's kind of the Adventist propaganda, if you will, that's been kind of shoveled into my head since I was a little kid, a lot of this stuff also makes sense to me too. And then there's a part of me like, what are you going to do? If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But, maybe on a global scenario, you can think that way. But from an individual standpoint, I can still do something. And while
Amen.
there is light, we need to be working.
Yeah. And
There are a lot
we're,
of challenges, but there is a lot of challenges because how do we reach out to these younger kids? Because there seems to be this wide gap where their complete worldview and kind of the way that they see reality is so drastically different than everybody that's ever lived before them.
right, right.
Sorry, I don't know. I just went off on a tangent. I don't even know why we're talking about that.
Yeah. Well, where sin abounds, grace does much more abound. And, definitely as we see our current situation in our churches and in the society, I think, that uh, God will bring forces that will break through all this darkness and this evil to at least give people a chance
Yeah.
to make that choice. Do they want to do? Are they going to be on the side of righteousness or not? And I think we as leaders of the church really need to uh, focus on, as you were talking about, making the main thing the main thing, and really focus on the cross of Christ and the righteousness of Jesus, because that's the only thing that will really pierce through, I think, um, this miasma of confusion and hatred and vitriol. And yeah, that's what I think. But
Yeah, it's a very interesting time to be alive. And yeah, I don't know. It's just, and if you kind of take in all that vitriol and hate, like all that, I mean, you could, some people say, oh, vitriol is a word, but it's really just another word for passion, right? It's just, but passion in a negative way, but they're
yeah.
passionate about it. And then you would think that a lot, with just watching these demonstrations and whatever, the other thing that's very common with the millennial generation is they've pretty much been, that's probably the first generation that's been growing up in a very fractured home environment where more of them grew up in a single family, single parent home than the other, where more of them now, and when you take a mom and dad out of the household and you got a single mom working, well, then the single mom, what are they going to do? They're going to be working 2-3 jobs to provide, which means that aside from the parent being, putting food on the table and shelter and clothing on them, the parenting role doesn't come from them at all. The parenting role is coming from society. It's coming from culture. It's coming from social media and so on and so forth. And so I think, so it's almost like the blind leading the blind, right?
Right,
So you
right.
got, all these things going on. And so there, and this, I don't know exactly how to put my fingers on it, but I also have a deep, deep sense that with the level of passion and the vitriol and stuff that we were seeing from them, I think it's actually a direct reflection of the pain and just kind of the
Mm,
suffering and whatever that they're dealing with inside,
mhm,
like this whole concept of all, like so much, suicides or suicide attempts and things. And
mm,
we always had that, but it was very few and far in between, right?
right.
Now it's just like it's almost like fashionable to talk about, oh yeah, I was thinking about killing myself last week, but it's just like, and then Netflix puts out a big TV show about it, right? They've done 2 seasons of it. And so it's like, there must be a lot of pain. And so even when we're like, Josh, even when we're dealing with this stuff at camp meeting and whatever, and you're talking to these kids and obviously they're going through so much pain, but then when you actually hear out of their mouth what's causing them the pain,
Mhm.
again, I have to bite my tongue because my first reaction is to roll my eyes and go, oh, that's what you're upset about? I mean, that's the thing that I want to say. But yeah, I think part of the way that entire culture has been brought up, there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of just issues underneath that nobody knows how to deal with.
Mhm.
And there's this kind of group catharsis that happens when you can rage against the enemy together as a group. And so I
Mhm.
think that provides some catharsis for them and therefore continues to put more fuel onto that fire. But there is definitely something inside of them that is hurting. And,
Mm.
if we can
Mhm.
kind of figure out a way, because, we know obviously the answer to that is Jesus, but
Mhm.
it has to be presented in a way that it can get through to them. And sometimes that would mean not using the name of Jesus and using different methods and whatever to kind of get in
Mm.
there.
Right.
But I think if somebody can try, if someone can start to make some hypotheses about, from a psychological level or, and an emotional level, why these kids are going through what they're going through and what's necessary to provide some healing and whatnot. I think there's a huge ministry there that may be something that could lead into the second coming of Christ. But I wouldn't even know where to start something like that.
Mm. Well, thank you. Well, you not just, I think you really have been thinking a lot about what's going on, not in our, you know, our local church, but in society and um, just general forces. But what this pandemic has added to that is really just a catalyst for a lot of the passion and um, the polarization. I think it really
Yeah.
it exacerbates it. So yeah, um, it is an interesting time, but I think uh, there is always so much opportunity in the darkness.
Mhm.
In the concentration camps, there was always some light there.
Yeah.
So I think we as leaders of the church, really, I think this is a time for us to really not do church as we have always done, but really search ourselves, you know, and see where, you know, we just really have to figure out the fundamentals of why we do church and, just realizing that, um, yeah, thank you for your observations about this new generation. I think, you really put your finger on the pulse of a lot of the forces. So, yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks, Pastor Jimmy.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's pray. And
Okay.
okay, I can pray.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to speak with Pastor Jimmy. Uh, it is a very unique time in history, and it's forcing everybody to be introspective and really see what's going on with our lives, with our families, with our churches, with our society. And we pray for the Holy Spirit to break through and to open our minds and hearts to what is happening in the spiritual world.
Mhm.
Because what we see, what we know, that we are not fighting against physical things, but spiritual things in nature. So I just pray we as leaders, as pastors, um, can find a way to lead the people in our influence to the cross, where there is that's the only answer of um, of beholding the beauty of Jesus and to take up our crosses and to be obedient to your Holy Spirit. And that is a hard thing for this generation to hear. So, Father, we pray that we would show the beauty of Jesus, that they would be attracted um, by Jesus's wonderful character. I pray for these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
How many more of these you got to do?
I think two more, and it's like I don't know how to edit videos. So basically I was debating whether to, to